I saw something strange in my neighborhood the other day, but I don't know who to call, and I'm not good under pressure. That's alright, I'll just resort to plan B. Something I've always greatly admired about the Ghostbusters films are their ghosts. Where most modern spirits in films are people who look like people, but like evil, the Ghostbusters designs are bonkers. And since I may never taste the sweet bliss of Ecto-Cooler, I thought the next best GB memento I could give myself is my own haunted building. Welcome to Midnight Hobbies, and today I'll be making the Ghostbusters Firehouse with a spooky resident. Starting with a classic bit of cardboard packaging, oh, wait a minute, there's something inside. So actually starting with a large piece of foam board, I sketched and sliced out my 4 walls before going back in with the pencil to punch out the windows. Once I had made its twin and finished the cutouts on the rest of the walls, I checked how it stood and began to peel away the skin of the board. Though this was a new brand of foam board I brought, and half a layer of paper would stay stuck even when you used a hobby knife to peel it off and it would tear again, so you had to start over. Once I had the foam clean, I uncleaned it with a small ball of foil which I used to aggressively indent an aged stone-like texture onto the pieces. Texture. Then with a hobby knife and pencil, I began to carve in the trim details of the wall, before eventually moving on to the bricks. Though starting it didn't occur to me how long it would take to carve out said bricks, aka a whole day, but I guess I subconsciously love torturing myself. And I mean all the bricks. Once all the detailing was done, I was left with 4 walls ready to receive an angled trim so that the edges were clean when glued together. I used matte pins to hold it in place to dry before moving in with smaller strips of foam board to build up the many layers of visual noise to distract you from the fact of how unscreen accurate this build is. My concept was to have the firehouse look desolate except for its oversized poltergeist, so we can just say the strange proportions are an extension of the ghost possessing the building. That sounds good enough, right? And now that it was looking like everyone's favourite Cenobite, it was time to find some suitable cardboard packaging.
Hello, my name is Boo.
With some leftover blueberry box from the last build, I began slicing out centimetre thick strips to become the overhang. Though my initial attempt to do the corner cuts didn't work out so good, so I ripped them off and instead made cuts that had the corner as one piece, and then filled in the gaps with more blueberry. A little door was constructed out of offcuts and a small handle was added from a piece of crafting stick, before I built a small yet oversized air vent for the side. Now we just need something to help buff up these windows.
Oh, hello there!
Using air dry clay that I squished and rolled out into a wide fettuccine, I cut out the strips of bricks that lined the windows. And once I was able to peel them off in one piece, they were glued onto the model where I cleaned them up with some sculpting tools before texturing with an array of items to convince you that I know what I'm doing. Well, it's certainly looking like a building, but it's not a firehouse without some fire. So using this mini firewood, also known as crafting sticks, I began to construct the frames of the windows. Packaging card was used to build the template of the door, which was then lined with more cuts of mini firewood. I then snapped each piece in half and trimmed them down so that I could build the door up to look like the creature's teeth. Speaking of creature, it's time to fill this building with its ghost host. I found a piece of cardboard that would fit as its face before sketching and cutting out its mouth so that it could breathe. But it won't be able to see what it's eating without its eyes, so using some leftover styrofoam bowls from my Starship Mario build, I cut them in half and donned this beautiful beast with 5 beautiful eyes. Its bulky shape was built up with more cardboard so that it could give the appearance of occupying the whole of the firehouse. This is one big boy indeed. Eyelids out of foam sheet were stuck in place with pins as per my training at med school.
Back off, man. I'm a scientist.
Before moving on to give this ghost some skin. I rolled the foil into crinkly strips that were then hot glued onto the cardboard to build up slimy layers of mass. But he's a little too shiny for my liking. If only there was someone who could help fix that.
It's right here, Ray. It's looking at me.
He's an ugly little spud, isn't he?
I think he can hear you, Ray.
Using I whipped up some classic black paint and Mod Podge before lathering the whole building and attachments with the mix. I then realised I forgot these little support pieces, so just pretend they were there all along, because it's paint time.
You slimed me.
Starting with a fire truck red, I tackled the midsection of bricks, before going in with a dark orange on a select few to give it some variation. I then went in with an early dry brush since I didn't want to cross-contaminate the colours later on, and then got started on the stone with some trusty grey. This grey was used for pretty much every other surface that wasn't red, before receiving some layers of delicious, nutritious dry brushing to keep it looking healthy and highly detailed. Ugh, someone's looking a little dry after their priming, so let's hydrate that skin with some mean green ectoplasm. Much better. I then reached for this cursed yellow-green that hasn't treated me well in the past, but actually worked quite brilliantly as a dry brush on this gooey ghoul. I then hit the eyelids with some red before going in and painting an eclectic array of eyeballs within. I thought it would be fun to theorise that this ghost is an accumulation of a whole bunch of different souls that squished out of the containment unit at the same time, forming one blob of horror. But at least they have each other. And then drowned in gloss spray paint to make it extra gooey looking, and it was done. The door got a typical brown palette before I moved on to this tongue I'd made out of some air dry clay. And if you're wondering why all of my creature creations end up with uncomfortably long tongues, I like to think it's just older me working through the childhood trauma of Large Marge. I then topped up the door and the vent before sticking all of these little knickknacks into place. I then filled the roof with a slice of cardboard before covering it in air dry clay and a stony paint job. And now for some windows. Egg! Using this leftover lid from a tray of chalky eggs, I cut out little fractures of window shards before dressing them up with white paint for age, and then glued them into place. Now that this big boy was all moved in, I decorated the place with some glossy globs of green before realising the creature was actually lifting the building up a little bit, but that can all be fixed with the base. With this horrible XPS foam in hand, I marked out the placement of the model before tearing it off. I then clawed away at where the ghost would sit to stop it from raising the roof, and etched a slice of the concrete jungle onto the rest of it using my hobby knife and ruler. It then got plastered before moving back inside for some more dry brushing. A brown wash was added to the footpath for some New York grease, making sure to dab away the excess before moving in with one more tickle of dry brushing because I have an addiction. And then it was finally time to start sticking everything in place. These ghouly wisps that I whipped out of clay and green gloss were then attached, as well as these wood planks out of crafting sticks to really run it home that this place has been left for haunts. This tiny Stay Puft wrapper I printed was crinkled and glued out the back, and then I added a glossy pink mix as a little reference to that problematic sequel. It unfortunately didn't make my model dance when I played Jackie Wilson though. Anyway, some last minute brown as grime, and then it was finally time to put this thing back on the market. Thanks for watching the birth of another disturbing brainchild of mine. Be sure to let me know in the comments what other sort of twisted takes on architecture you might like to see in the future. And consider subscribing if you've been waiting for me to ask you to. Take care everyone, and I'll see you at the next video.